Welcome to the course Digital Transformation and Technological Innovation. So, we are into our third module, that is transitions in software markets. So, let us continue our discussion. So, in the last session we were talking about different categories of cloud computing, and we were able to cover SaaS and PaaS and IaaS also, and some part of that was left. So, let us complete that. So, revenue models for IaaS. So, what are the different revenue model for infrastructure as a service? So, this is one of the most granular service among all cloud computing options that we have. So, most granular, and the charges are more like charge for every hour or byte of raw infrastructure. So, this goes to most granular level in terms of how many hours of computing used, or storage, how many bytes of storage used, and then also along with per month in a given month how much of storage is allowed and how much is used and all that, right. So, most granular and charging for every hour or byte of raw infrastructure, right. So, first of the model is pay as you go, right. So, what this model is about, pay for virtual machines or storage. So, it could be anything, more often than not. When we say virtual machine, more often than not RAM or memory would be part of that. So, you will have to pick a virtual machine, the kind of virtual machine that you need for your software, and then similarly you will have to pick the kind of storage that you need for your software, and accordingly you will have to pick the plan. But plan more often than not would be based on hour and byte and all that, a combination of that. So, pay for virtual machines or storage by the hour/month or byte, right. So, all the three main cloud provider, whether it is Amazon or Google or Azure, all three of them give this model, right. So, Amazon EC2, Google Cloud or Azure, you see pay as you go model working there, right. That is one of the common options that firms opt for, right. So, because payment is very granular by hour or by byte. So, therefore, whenever you are not using the server or the storage, then you might want to turn it off, so that you are able to optimize or minimize your payment to cloud services, right. So, therefore, a bit of budgeting and the kind of computing and kind of storage that a firm would be needing, that has to be taken care of, and then maybe the operating procedures firm need to develop, how they can effectively use their cloud services while also minimizing the cost, right. Because if it is on, and then the billing is also on. Then second model that is common is reserved instances. So, many firms they would like to have dedicated instances, dedicated virtual machines for their software or computing use. So, multi-year contract, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, those kind of contracts are actually offered by these all three main cloud providers, whether it is Amazon, Google, right. So, multi-year contract is there, and you can get a massive discount compared to on-demand prices. So, in comparison to on-demand prices, if you are reserving the instance, then there is some discount that you get, right. So, obviously, you will go for this instance, you will do your cost benefit analysis, that with the discount how much it is costing, how much reserving an instance is costing, and how much pay as you go model is costing. So, all that analysis one has to, depending on their use case or depending on the kind of computing or storage consumption they would be doing. Third one is spot pricing. So, here the providers they would like to facilitate the bidding process for unused capacity. So, but they offer deep discounts, but there is a riding condition that the server may be reclaimed at any time, because the main business of cloud computing vendor is to be able to meet their pay as you go kind of revenue model, the clients, the customers firms which are opting for this, or reserve instances. So, that is their primary business. So, whatever unutilized capacity that they are offering, so they offer through a bid. So, there are deep discount, but then it would be conditional. In case to meet some demand spike, the vendor might reclaim it, right. But this is a spot pricing is actually a economical option for firms, right. Especially if a firm is doing some non-critical work and there is very less risk of data loss or other kinds of loss, right. It's just some computing that they might be doing and storing the results somewhere. So they might go for this because of the discounts that are linked to spot pricing. Then data transfer, because this is again platform as a service and we are talking about data and computing. So in case a firm decides to move out data, then there would be charges for moving out data, because from cloud vendors, cloud providers data center, the data might be moved anywhere, right. So charges for moving data out of providers network to the internet or other regions, right. So for example, DigitalOcean is a company which has this option, is a cloud provider which has this option of data transfer, and the charges are there. So you can see there are lots of models, and depending on the needs of different firms, they can optimize pay as you go. If they just need some computing storage, and they can go for pay as you go based on consumption of CPU or consumption of storage. Then reserve instance, they can reserve the dedicated instances if they are doing some more important work where they don't want their setup to be disturbed. And then the spot pricing is also there. Data transfer is one more. Now let's look at another important question, that is, why would firms go for renting instead of buying software? So what are the factors that actually go in favor of SaaS, and the reasons why firms go with that. But before that, let's look at what are the some of these SaaS options, what are the popular or top SaaS offerings that are there. So let's look at enterprise focused SaaS, what are the topmost offering. So if we look at SaaS CRM, right. So in SaaS CRM category, Salesforce is there, HubSpot is there, right. So these are the two firms, two cloud provider catering to this sales CRM category. Then another one is SaaS ERP. So in this case you have Oracle, NetSuite. So NetSuite was earlier separate company, it was later acquired by Oracle. Then SAP S/4 HANA is also there. Then SaaS for HR, for recruiting and many other activities that go with the recruitment and other human resources related activity. Workday is there, and Bamboo HR. These are some of the common names in this category. Then SaaS for data and intelligence. So if you want to manage data, process it, and do some sort of analytics, do some sort of extract some sort of intelligence from the data, then these are some of the products: Microsoft Power BI and Tableau, which has been acquired by Salesforce. And Snowflake and Databricks is also there, and ThoughtSpot is also there. So all these are slightly different in terms of the segment that they are catering to, and Microsoft Power BI is more for ecosystem integration, while Tableau would be where environment which is presentation heavy environment where visualizations and those things are more required. So Tableau would be more suitable for that. Then Snowflake and Databricks, they are more data driven and machine learning kind of environment, and ThoughtSpot is more like search kind of analytics that is there. So these are some of the common familiar enterprise SaaS offerings and products and the firms. So sometimes product names and the firms that might be pretty much same. Another category within this enterprise focus SaaS is SaaS for productivity and collaboration, right. So Microsoft Teams is there, and then Microsoft Office 365 is there. Then Slack is there for communication. Microsoft Teams was for more collaboration and online meeting and all that. And Microsoft Office 365 is more productivity, cloud option for productivity, and then Slack is there for communication. ClickUp and Monday.com is more project management, collaboration kind of activities. These two are there. So these are SaaS option in case of productivity and collaboration. So in case of productivity and collaboration, and also in case of data intelligence, some of these offerings are not purely enterprise. The single users or the individual users might also go for that. Now let's move to next important question, that after discussion of the popular products. So we go back to our next important question, that why would firms go for SaaS, that is renting a software, than instead of the traditional option, that is buying a software, right. So first up is cost savings, one of the important factor. So there are lots of cost saving because you would just be incurring minimal capital investment. If you go for SaaS, then firm would be incurring minimal capital investment, because much of the infrastructure that would be needed and the maintenance that would be needed, it would be handled by the SaaS provider. So you can see upfront component of purchase, that is taken away, in the sense if you buy a software for traditional uses, where on-prem uses, then you will have to pay the whole price of that software. But when you go for SaaS, then it is usage based or subscription based. That means you are not incurring the full upfront cost, or don't have to pay the full price to buy a software. So that upfront component of purchase, that is taken away in case of SaaS when we rent out. So essentially when you rent out something, you don't have to pay the price that goes in owning a product, right. And then there are costs for licensing, installation and configuration of products. So if you are going for on-prem, then there other software, other hardware might be required. So licensing would be there, installation, configuration of all that setup would have to be done by the firm itself. Now in case of cloud, all that is again taken care by the SaaS provider. So this cost also goes away. Then annual maintenance contracts not needed again. So the costs for the IT staff, the people who would actually be doing all these activities that we just talked about, they'll also be paid, right. So there would be a lot more cost savings when it comes to when we go for SaaS, and these are some of the items that we have listed here. So cost savings due to minimal capital investment, that is a very huge plus for SaaS. Then if we look at the financial risk mitigation, then SaaS, it's a placement in the balance sheet or other financial statement that changes. SaaS becomes a variable operating expense. So from being a capital investment, it moves to variable operating expense. So that also reduces the financial risk, because for every capital that you'll have to pay a lot, and that all that fixed cost might be taken away and just become variable operating expense, so much more manageable. So financial risk mitigation also happens when you go for the SaaS. So obviously for this reason also is a good option for startups or small firms. Then affordability, while we are talking about the startups or the small firms, then on their own the startups or small firms might find it very difficult to actually buy sophisticated tech, right. But SaaS models makes it much more manageable, much more affordable, because it's more of a subscription usage based. And in case many times there could be realization that a particular software and setup was not contributing to what they needed, then they can discontinue the service in case of SaaS. But if they had bought, then they'll have to just do their workarounds. If they had bought the software and the whole setup, they'll have to do workaround if they are dissatisfied with that particular system. So smaller firms cannot easily afford, but with the SaaS option they can now afford, right. So expensive on-prem system they cannot afford, but SaaS option they can also get access to sophisticated tech and take benefit from using it, right. Scalability to meet demand fluctuations, right. So whenever you are running a system 24/7, right, and it might be a transaction processing system or any other system, and you are running it 24/7, then there might be demand fluctuations during the day or during the week and during the festive seasons, right. So scalability is very much required in terms of computing power, storage and everything else that goes with it, so that you are able to meet these increasing demand that is there in those times. So when firms go for SaaS option, then there is a guaranteed uptime that they can get from SaaS, because that vendor will have large data centers and they have the whole scalability setup that is already there. So they can guarantee uptime, and they can ability to meet demand spikes is also with them. So ability to meet demand spikes for production environment, and there are lots of firms with wide usage variance. So for those firms which are into wide usage variance, that during most months in the year they might not be using a particular software, but during 1 or 2 months, let's say in case of finance, during 1 or 2 months in the closing months, they would be doing a heavy usage. So there is a wide usage variance, so that can be better managed with SaaS option rather than on-prem option. Then for the same scalability and to be able to meet demand fluctuation, wide usage variance and all that, firms can go for a service level agreement with the SaaS vendor, and therefore they can take those guarantees in terms of uptime and demand spikes, meeting demand spikes. So then these are also two important factors, affordability and scalability, why firms might go for SaaS option, renting out option, instead of buying software. What is next? Next is quality service. So higher quality service across service level and at lower cost. So through SaaS, firms can get a higher quality of service and for different service levels and at lower cost as well. Obviously the SaaS provider has to pass on that cost to the consumer. So because SaaS provider would be catering to lots of consumers and users, so they can benefit from economies of scale, right? So they would be running large data centers and supporting the SaaS subscription across thousands of clients or customers or end users. So they can achieve this economies of scale, and they can optimize because they are running data center and all that, and how people are accessing those particular software. So they can analyze all that and optimize software, hardware and other related costs. So therefore SaaS vendors can benefit from economies of scale, and when they benefit from that economies of scale, they might end up improving the service as such. So therefore the quality of service might go up as a consequence of this optimization that the SaaS provider might do. So it might not just be the SaaS provider reducing their cost, it will also be that SaaS provider will try to provide a better quality of service while doing that optimization to reduce cost. Another thing that can happen is that SaaS firms might boost service quality by learning from diverse experiences that might come by serving a huge volume of end users, right? Because there are so many end users and their use cases and the way they want the computing environment to be, all that might vary from one end user to another end user, from one firm to another firm, and therefore the SaaS provider can learn from all those diverse experiences, and they can enhance their systems, enhance their SaaS offering, and the service quality might go up because of this. So more likely in case of a SaaS offering, firms might get better quality of service and maybe at a economical price because of the economies of scale that the provider will get, and hopefully the provider will transfer some of that to their customer base. So let's move on, let's look at what is the next factor. So next factor is that the firms who are going for SaaS might be quick to new tech and compliances, right? Why that can happen? Because SaaS customer base might push the SaaS provider to actually deploy that new tech or integrate that new tech as part of the SaaS offering, and also push these customer base can push SaaS provider to actually comply with new regulations that might come, right? So typically push for new tech and compliances like green data centers. There might be regulatory compliances in terms of, because there is so much of heat that is being generated through data centers. So there might be push by the government or regulatory agency to cut down the power cost and cooling bills and other things in favor of greener technologies, more efficient usage of computing, and data centers or digital infrastructure in general. So therefore, SaaS provider might be better placed in terms of doing the integration for new tech or meeting the new compliances, and the customer base might push for it. So overall, the firms might go for SaaS for this benefit also. Then what is the next factor? Remote access and availability. Because cloud computing in general, the access is through internet. That means if you have an internet connection in your computing devices, whether it's a smartphone or laptop or workstation, any device, you can access your SaaS applications. So SaaS application in a way become truly global, because from anywhere you can access them. For example, we access our Google Drive from anywhere while traveling also, right? So truly global due to their availability anywhere via an internet connection. You should just be able to connect to internet connection, and you can access your SaaS application via that, right? So remote access and availability is there, which is not a which is not something that is there in the on-prem solutions. Obviously, the firms are nowadays going for private cloud option also. So in that case, this feature may come, and many other features or factors that we have talked about might come there. But still, main comparison that we are doing is with SaaS offering versus on-prem and not the private cloud. So now there are many benefits that go to SaaS provider side also. So because of the whole business model and because of the way new way of serving to the customers. So first benefit that they get is that the SaaS provider, if they were to be traditional software provider, then they might have to manage a particular software, different kind of hardware and different kind of operating systems, or different kind of other database and other systems, right? But when they become a SaaS provider, then it is just user is only looking at the interface and what platform, underlying platform is there which is supporting the SaaS. They don't have visibility to that. So therefore, SaaS provider has a benefit that they can just get away with running their software for just a single platform on the cloud. So they don't have to manage their software for multiple platforms, for example multiple operating systems like Windows or Linux or Unix. So earlier we talked about that a software might have to different versions of that software might have to be created which are compatible with Windows or Linux or Unix or Mac, right? So that is not needed in case of SaaS offering, because users don't have to worry about it, because they are only accessing the software and the platform is hidden or managed by the SaaS provider. So therefore, SaaS provider also needs to manage just software just for a single platform, right? So therefore, need to support the development of their software for just a single platform on the cloud, right? But this might have an adverse impact in the sense that in future software might just be developed for one platform, because most of the applications would be through SaaS offerings. So most of the access and usage would be through SaaS offerings. Then development of software will also be limited to one particular kind of platform, whether it be operating system or hardware. So example is packaged software firms support their software for multiple operating systems like Windows, Linux and Unix variants. So that we are already familiar with. Now this eases out for the SaaS provider. Next benefit that SaaS provider might get is tighter feedback loop, because they can see and monitor and analyze how their customer are using the software product. So therefore, they can understand better from that kind of uses and maybe improve or enhance their SaaS offering, right? So this direct feedback loop is not present in traditional software option, where if there is an error that occurs, then users have to actively allow that report to be sent to the provider, right? But here in case of the cloud, in case of a SaaS provider, they can pretty much see how the usage is happening and what are the challenges or difficulties that users are facing, and therefore they can enhance their offering there. So tighter feedback loop. Then next is instant deployment for all, right. Again this is also important in the sense that on-prem or or traditional software installation, the user who has the end user has to do a lot in the sense if there is a particular bug that is there in the existing version of the software, they'll have to reinstall the new version of the software or install the patch, right. So there is an action point that goes back to the end user. So they'll have to take action, otherwise they'll be running a buggy software version, right. But here in the case of cloud, that responsibility lies to the SaaS provider. So therefore they can do, if there is any bug fix or any product enhancement, in one go they can do this instant deployment for all of their customer base. So instant deployment for all. So there would be almost near zero problems in terms of software running with buggy software running in different computer machines, and might hamper the reputation of the company if something goes wrong. So that is also taken away. So instant deployment and benefit for the SaaS provider in this sense. So if there is a problem with the software, they can fix it and instantly deploy the fix. Then next benefit is lower distribution cost. So we compare to the packaged software or traditional software, then in case of SaaS there are lower distribution cost because they are selling direct to end users. So there is no intermediary in between, there is no middleman in between. So they don't have to say package a software in CD-ROM or DVD and other formats and sell that in a more physical sense to their customers. So that is not needed. They can sell direct to end users, rather end users access the software through internet, right. So lower distribution cost. So this allows vendor to, so that means that cost this cost goes down, or in other words the profits that the SaaS vendor or traditional vendor was actually sharing with the stores or distributors in case of packaged software, that goes back to the SaaS provider. So they capture the profits that used to be shared with stores and distributors in the case of packaged software. Now all that captured profits is taken away from stores and distributors and goes back to the provider. Now the provider happens to be a SaaS provider, right. So then they can use some of that profit to reduce the price of the software. So allows vendor to charge less. So there's lower distribution cost because the selling is directly through internet and directly to the end users. So that is another benefit for the SaaS provider. So their profitability improves from that same software. Now what are other benefits that can be there? So accessibility to niche markets, right. So in case of traditional way of distributing software, niche markets are difficult to capture, right. But in case of direct selling via cloud offerings like SaaS offering, accessibility to niche market is very much achievable. So direct distribution allows SaaS providers to reach niche markets from day one, right. Once software is ready, you are giving SaaS offering, anybody can subscribe and start using. So from day one you can start having the deployment footprints. So quickly get deployment footprints, that option is there. And also we have earlier talked about different revenue models for SaaS, in the sense freemium is also there, right. So free version users can quickly start using, and therefore the footprint will start moving from day one. So therefore niche markets, they can be served better, they can be approached better by SaaS provider than in the case of packaged software, traditional software companies. So what is other benefit that is there? So next one is software piracy. So in case of packaged software which is delivered via CD-ROMs or DVD or USBs and other physical media, so there the piracy is very much possible. It was prevalent, right. But the moment much of this instead of using the packaged software mode, more customer they start switching for the SaaS option, then this software piracy goes away, because new versions of the software or new software, they will not be available in physical media form, and therefore it will be near impossible to create an executable illegal copy in an online service. So that is impossible. So therefore software piracy goes away. Something similar that we see in many other industries also, that for example music industry, there used to be a lot more piracy for music, and now because of the SaaS offering, the Spotify and other apps, they are directly delivering music to the customers, and therefore piracy has been taken away, because people with the they can directly listen to the music even for free, because that model is also supported by advertising. So therefore these firms are able to stream music for free and the piracy goes away, right. The same is applicable in case of traditional software given through a SaaS offering. So reducing software piracy, because it is near impossible to create an executable illegal copy of an online service, right. So then there is a next question. So we would like to stop here, and the next question, that is what are the risks and concerns linked to SaaS, that will take up in the next session. Thank you.